Welcome to the Human Experience Podcast, the only podcast designed to fuse your left and right brain hemispheres and feed it the most entertaining and mentally engaging topics on the planet. As we approach our ascent, please make sure your frontal, temporal and occipital lobes are in their full upright position. As you take your seat of consciousness, relax your senses and allow us to take you on a journey. We are the Intimate Strangers. Thank you for listening.
Hey guys, such an interesting episode here with Misha from NDERF, the Near-Death Experiences Research Foundation. Really intriguing work that they're doing, just collecting these various experiences. Please be sure to check us out on YouTube. There is a donate button on our main page. Click that, buy us a beer. We are working hard here at HXP. This is a really great episode, guys. I really had fun doing it, so thank you for listening. The human experience is entering the afterlife. My guest tonight is Misha from the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. Misha, my man, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to HXP.
Glad to be here.
Near-death experiences really fascinate me, and I'm very interested in talking about this. How did you get started in this work?
You asked me the hardest question first, actually. The honest answer is I don't remember. I've always been interested in the paranormal, and I think probably what happened is I started listening to a bunch of paranormal podcasts, and probably they worked their way around from UFOs to out-of-body and near-death experience, and probably I started, searching the web and started reading about it. That's probably what happened.
Oh, okay. Cool. So what is your background specifically?
Well, my background is I'm a microbiologist. Right now I'm an English teacher in Russia, but for 15 or 20 years I was a microbiologist specializing in DNA research and cancer research. And so when I look at the paranormal, I tend to ask a lot of hard questions.
That's good, man. I like that. Science is definitely interesting.
And I'm very open-minded to it. Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm very open-minded to it, too. I'm not like these guys who say, this is not true and that can't be true. That's not real science. That's being closed-minded.
Yeah, putting the science aspect of this is important, I think. So why don't we get into what NDERF does and how it got started? So can you tell us what they do over there?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. NDERF, the NDERF, or Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, was started. I did some checking with my colleagues, and I hope I'm going to get these facts right. But it was started, I think, in 1998 by Dr. Jeffrey Long. I believe he's a radiation oncologist in Louisiana. And he began collecting reports of people who have, almost died and had unusual experiences. And Xavier, you probably already know that this came into the public consciousness. A lot of people point to Raymond Moody with his books. I think one of them was, what was it, Life After Life or something like that?
Yeah.
It's right around the 70s. But anyway, NDERF was started in 98. With Dr. Jeffrey Long, and now his wife, Jody Long, is involved, and she's really a big driving force behind the websites and things. What they do is collect stories from people, and I don't like the word stories because that sounds like fairy tales, so I like to use the word accounts from people. But then that sounds like bank accounts, but so I don't know what word to use. But they collect experiences from people. And they collect them by having them fill out a questionnaire. And it's got 20 or 30 questions. And it says, what happened to you? Were you in medical distress? Were your perceptions different? Did you meet any relatives? Did you meet a loving entity? Did you get any special abilities after this? How did you relate to others after this? Did scenes from the world's future come to you? How was your hearing, your vision? All kinds of questions. So they basically catalog this stuff together and then try to make some sense of it through research and making connections.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting. There's Bruce Grayson developed a scale to measure the depth of an individual's near-death experience. Have you heard of this?
I think I have. Not on the top of my head, but I did hear about it.
It's basically, he did this, I'm not sure exactly when, but he just a 0, 1, or 2 answer on various questions, kind of like what Endorf is doing. And basically the questions consist of, did time speed up or slow down? Were your thoughts the normal? Were there scenes from your past? Did you have feelings of joy? Was there a sense of connectedness with the universe? Do you notice that there is a congruence or a similar quality, a common type experience when people are talking about their NDEs?
Absolutely. And Xavier, before I get started, I forgot to say it at the outset, but I'm not really speaking on behalf of Endorf just because I'm an individual volunteer, but I'm just going to answer as honestly as I can as an individual who's read many hundreds of NDEs, mostly from Endorf. So that's my little disclaimer that I'm not saying anything official for them.
Okay.
But in answer to your question, absolutely, there are common features. And Dr. Long has published a book. We don't push books or anything like that. I think he was just collecting the data in a convenient form. When I think they've got about 4,000 NDEs. Making sense of that is not going to be easy, and a book is going to be a lot easier to digest. But in this particular book, which is called Evidence of the Afterlife, he goes through about 12 features that make up NDEs. Not all of them are present in every case, but they keep showing up over and over again. And if you'd like, I can go through those with you.
Okay, sure.
Like leaving your body. Okay. Well, and these don't take a lot of time. It's a pretty short list. Feeling a physical separation of your consciousness from your body. That happens in about 75% of the NDEs. Feeling that your senses are really, really heightened. In other words, seeing very, very vivid colors or audio or sounds which are very vivid happens in about 74% of the cases. Feeling in really, really intense emotions and feelings is about 76% of the cases. Passing through a tunnel is kind of a cliche, and it does happen, but not as much as people think. That's about 34% of the time. Encountering a brilliant or mystical light, some sort of illumination, is about 65% of the time. Encountering other beings, and this could be mystical beings or relatives or anything, just some sort of sentient being, is about 57% of the time. So not everyone sees their relatives or an angel or something. It's a little over half.
Right.
A very different sense of time and space is about 61% of the time. A full review of everything that happened in your life, those are really fascinating to me. That's about 22% of the time. Encountering some other completely different dimension, something you might call heavenly or some sort of dimension, 41% of the time. Encountering special knowledge. In other words, you feel that maybe you understand everything about how the universe works, how it's put together. It's like a Swiss watch, and you know what all the gears do. That's going to be about 31% of the time. And other kinds of knowledge, like knowing all about yourself and other relationships around you, that's also about 31% of the time. Reaching a barrier that you cannot cross, or a boundary, is about 31% of the time. And having a memory of slamming back into your body or re-entering into your physical body, about 59% of the time. So those are 12 features that seem to be showing up a lot.
Very interesting. So there does seem to be a relationship with, like, you're exiting your body. So you, in my research, I found that most people encounter this sort of sense of love, and they exit their body and they can see their physical body there, and there seems to be a overwhelming sense of being home. And
right.
to me, that is really important. And mean, I've always, throughout my life, and the people close to me know this about me, but I've always kind of longed for this feeling of being home. And I'm not sure if you...
You and me both, brother.
Yeah, there you go. So I don't know
I feel like I'm somebody dropped me off at the wrong train station here. I don't
Yeah, I hear that. So, I mean, all of these experiences that I've read are truly fascinating, and these people who, encounter this sort of death and they're physically dead for a few minutes, and whether it's occurring in the brain or whether it's this DMT release that happens in your brain or not, I'm not sure if I care about that. I think I'm so fascinated by this experience, and if the DMT in my brain is manufacturing this super cool reality, it makes no difference to me. I'm not going to be able to tell anyway. So, yeah, man. I mean, if we could get into some of the NDEs that you've read about, and if you'd like to share one or two of them with us, that might be interesting.
Okay. Yeah, and just to backtrack one step, there's two types of people. One says, if the results are great, does it matter if it's reality with a capital R? And there's other people who say, I'm a scientist and I definitely want to know, is it real? And I'm kind of the second group, and I'm not out to twist anyone's arm one way or the other, but I think that, I think there's a lot of evidence that things are really happening that people are experiencing. There are things that so-called veridical NDEs, they're verified. In other words, they leave their body and they notice something about the operating room or the cafeteria or a car accident or whatever, things that they should not be noticing from their viewpoint, as a, let's say there's a car accident and you're laid out on the grass and you're not in very good condition. And, and then you have an NDE, which includes leaving your body. And then you recover, and then you say to the paramedics, "What was that huge scratch on the top of your ambulance?" And they go, "What? You were laying on the grass," And these things do happen. And,
right.
And that's why I believe that in most cases things are really happening that people are experiencing.
If I could just drop a fact really fast, and this is important, I think, to get into before we talk about the experiences themselves. The first attempts at resuscitation didn't really occur for the human body until about 1767. So what I'm saying is that this idea of reviving a person from death didn't really happen until about 300 or so, give or take, years ago. So, and the technology to restart the heart with electrodes, that didn't happen until 1967.
Mm-hmm.
So, these cardiac arrest patients that are being brought back, there wasn't necessarily the technology to do that, a few hundred years ago. So I think that these experiences that are coming out now, they're probably much more common, through our history.
I agree. I think that people had these for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It might have even been your grandmother in the cave with you, and she had weird visions and told your father, and he told you. Or, even if there's without modern resuscitation. If you want to go down the weird avenue, I was reading at one point about the guillotine, back when the French were really fond of cutting each other's heads off. And sometimes they would do experiments where they would tell the condemned, we want to know how long consciousness lasts. So be a good sport and blink your eyes like 20 times after we cut your head off. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think that usually people didn't get out more than 4 or 5 blinks after their head was cut off.
Wow!
And this is actually directly speaks to the question, because I had some email interchange with I think it was Dr. Long and maybe somebody else, but we were talking about physiology. And here's the deal: can you have conscious experience when you don't have blood pressure to your brain? The traditional viewpoint right now in neurology is no. I mean, when you faint, you're out. And if somebody, strangles you, or you suddenly get up too quickly after sleeping, you're just going to pass out, and you're probably not going to have sweet dreams. You're just going to be gone. And so what's happening with NDEs is that people are having orderly, structured memories of sometimes tunnels, sometimes relatives, sometimes God, if you want to use that word. I like to say source or higher self. But people are having structured interactions, and they're bringing these memories back with them when they wake up or they come out of rehab or whatever. So that doesn't make sense. I mean, and I want to give you an analogy to this. You've got a computer, right?
Oh, yeah. I was just
Okay.
about... Are you about to mention the quantum computing aspect of this? And
No, I was going to go
Okay.
somewhere else. I was going to say, you've had a brownout in your house where all the lights dim and there's a thunderstorm, and suddenly your computer goes tick, 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 and you go, oh, crap, I just lost my dissertation or my email or whatever, right?
Right.
When the power in your house has a brownout, your computer works much worse than normal. You will likely lose your documents, perhaps corrupt a couple dozen files, and if you're really lucky or unlucky, you'll have to reformat your whole system. The computer does not do well with unstable power. Now, where in the world do the skeptics get the idea that your brain, under unstable glucose, blood pressure, unstable power, basically, is going to perform much, much better and going to give you orderly memories, super vivid recollections, veridical things like another veridical thing that happens sometimes is people will meet somebody who has died that they didn't know who's died. So, for example, you've got a college buddy, Ray, and you think he's doing fine in Florida, but in fact, you didn't know that he was killed right after you graduated. So you have an NDE, and you're flying out there in the ether, astral somewhere, and Ray shows up in his leather jacket, and he says, "Hey, Xavier, how you doing?" And you say, "Ray, what are you doing here?" And then, you recover, and you go through rehab or whatever, and you say, I think I had an ND, and it seemed awfully real to me, but there was this one part of it that was kind of BS. And the person says, "Oh, what was that?" I said, "I met Ray, and Ray's my buddy. He's doing just fine." They go, "We didn't want to tell you about it
He died.
because that would stress you out, and you were already not doing too well yourself."
Yeah.
So, anyway, I'm a little bit on an
Super
aside.
interesting. Yeah. There's this flows well with what I was going to say next. There's an aspect of if you buy the theory that the universe is a big computer, there's in quantum computing there's something called superposition. It's where information can exist in two places at once. So if you have this idea that we are leaving our bodies and yet our physical bodies are still there, and this explains OBEs. I mean, you could kind of note that maybe NDEs, and if you're treading that like life or death line, that perhaps the data is being split, data being your consciousness, and your consciousness is being split into two, and you're experiencing these otherworldly states, and then you're coming back to your body, which I find highly intriguing.
Yeah, I'm with you on that totally. In fact, some of the Eastern religions, well, most of them, they have this idea that we're all connected as one, but we're down here kind of playing a game of, we're acting like we're separate, we're acting like there's black and white, good and evil, learning how to be selfish, learning how to be generous. If you take a comb for your hair and you put it into some water where the little tines, they touch the water a little bit, if you look under the water, it looks like there's all these little separate toothpicky things, right? But if you were to look, from a little bit of a distance, you'd see they're all connected at the top. Do you see the visual I'm trying to say?
Keep going.
If you take a comb and you were to immerse it a little bit, all the little pointy parts down, those pointy parts would be like individual lives. They all think they're separate. I'm separate. I'm Misha, and I'm Xavier, and I'm Ray, and I'm whoever. But if you kind of look at the whole cup, the whole glass, the whole situation, there's a part above the glass. There's a higher part, the handle of the comb, where it's all connected, and that's what a lot of the Eastern religions talk about.
Like the higher self, and you're saying that these different incarnations that we have are all connecting into the same higher self kind of being thing.
Yeah, like I think we're all probably part of the same God energy or source energy, and we've got this idea we're all separate, but we're not as separate as we think we are. I don't know if my visual worked, but that was what I was trying to say.
Right. Right.
But you asked me about an interesting story to tell you. There's for your listeners, they're going to have to do a little bit of but there's a fascinating video that they should watch. It's one of the best I've ever seen. Let me give you the title. They have to search YouTube for this. And the title is Famous Cardiac Surgeons' Stories of Near-Death Experiences in Surgery. That's Famous Cardiac Surgeons' Stories of Near-Death Experiences in Surgery. And the account for that video is Dental Mastermind Group. And this is a dentist and this cardiac surgeon. They're at a conference somewhere, and they decided to record his experience. And the surgeon is actually pretty famous, I think, in cardiology. His name is Dr. Lloyd Rudy. He's one of the guys who figured out why heart attacks really happen. But to make a long story short, he had the video is fantastic, but he had a patient who flatlined in surgery. And they had all kinds of monitoring devices on this guy. They had a esophageal echo probe, which I think kind of does a little sonar to see if your heart is beating. They had the EKGs and all that sort of stuff. And the surgery didn't go well. It just they couldn't save the guy. And so he gave up and told his other colleague, look, I don't think we can finish this. I don't think it's going to work. And they called him. They called the time of death and whatever. And he asked his assistant to sew the guy up, just a few wire stitches, which they do prior to autopsy. And I mean, it's not a cosmetic thing. It's just like, we're done here. And it didn't go well. And the guy is dead. Well, it turns out the guy, they left the room. They started to wash their hands and eat lunch or whatever they were doing. And cleaning people came in, and there was cardiograph tape all over the floor. I mean, just, it was kind of like a football stadium where the team didn't win, a sad scene in there. And somebody noticed that the echocardiogram started beating a little bit, and then the breathing started to come up a little bit, and then the electrocardiogram got a little bit of a pulse, and all this stuff started happening. And suddenly someone called and said, oh, you guys get back here. This guy for no reason is reviving. And as I recall from the video, the patient was dead for something like 12, 15, 17 minutes. I mean, a period of time which would not be good for your brain, because your brain needs oxygen. I don't think it does well after even 5 or 6 minutes because of the amount of glucose it needs and stuff like that. But it would have been brain damage time. And this guy fully revived and didn't have brain damage. And a few days later in the recovery suite, they decided to kind of say, hey, how's it going? And did you notice anything weird during the surgery? Not really leading questions, but to see if he noticed anything, if anything at all. And what really blew their minds was that he said, I saw my body there. I was floating above it. I saw you leave the room. I saw you were washing your hands. I saw the other guy went to get his sandwich and this and that. And, all of that is sort of logical in a way. But then he said, what was that long yellow thing attached to my monitor? His, the little electronic monitors. And the surgeon thought about it for a minute, and he was like, oh my gosh, or maybe even a more colorful language. And he said, this is completely impossible for him to have noticed. Not only was he dead in the circulatory sense, not only were all of his electric vitals, null, mm-hmm. but his eyes were probably taped shut. He was probably rolled into the suite with his eyes taped shut or whatever. But the really clincher for this surgeon, Dr. Lloyd Rudy, was that he said, when I start my surgeries, I have a monitor there. And when anyone calls my phone, doctors get a lot of phones and pages and stuff. When anyone calls me, I obviously am not going to pick up the phone while I'm, cutting into somebody. He says, my assistant or a nurse will come in and put a sticky note on the monitor. And if I recall, it becomes 2 notes stuck onto each. And he said by the end of a long 5, 8, 9 hour surgery, this thing becomes like a big, long yellow tail. And he said, this patient said, what was the long yellow tail hanging from my electric monitor? And he said, there was no way, because when I start my surgery, there's no tail. I don't have any phone calls when I begin. And he, he gets emotional, and he says, I'm sure there's something else. There's a higher power, and that our consciousness is not purely coming out of our brain. So.
That's really, really intriguing, man. And I kind of want to switch gears a little bit, just because I'm looking at this research paper that was conducted out of Amsterdam, and I mean, we're talking about NDEs and how often they occur, but there's another side to that. I mean, there's some people don't experience this. There was a study done out of Amsterdam by Vincent Myers, and they were studying out of how many people would have NDEs, and I think they studied 344 people, and out of that, I think it was only 62, which is 18% of the people that they studied experienced an NDE type phenomena type experience. And so most of the people didn't really have anything, notable to express. I mean, either there was no memory of the event or nothing happened. So that kind of leads me into asking, do you think that NDEs are common? Do you think everyone experiences this, or is there a picking process?
I mean, from the purely subjective point of view, my opinion is that NDEs are given to the world to kind of wake us up a little bit. They're not going to happen all the time. But just because something is rare doesn't mean it's not real. I mean, that's one of the big mistakes that science makes. They say, rare, not real. There are many things scientific world that are very rare and very real.
So, Misha, there seems to be a consensus, or I mean, there may be an idea that perhaps not everyone experiences this, and maybe do you think maybe some people have souls and other people don't, and maybe the people that do are having these NDEs? Or
I mean, that's a scary question. Do some people not have souls? I mean, I've met some of those, I think. No, it's a good question. There's a difference between something being rare and something being frequent. Often in science, when something is very rare, science says, oh, that doesn't exist. And that's baloney. There are many things that are rare and very real. If you draw a big square on your wall and you wait for some neutrino from outer space to go through that square on your wall, depending on what you're looking for, it might take a second or it might take 100 years. In science, there are many things that are rare and still very real. So when skeptics go down that route, it also kind of gets my steam going. But in answer to your question, it's probably not. I think that it's, in my own opinion, it's probably sort of a gift that's helping to wake the world up in a way. But the way I view it is that you have to view the NDE sort of as, or an injury or anything, as sort of like going from point A to point B. And not everyone is going to go through the whole process. Maybe not everyone needs, even a spiritual wake-up call. But let's keep it just straight down to the physical for a minute. If you're going to take a trip from Boston to New York, you're going to wake up, put on your tennis shoes, buy a ticket, walk somewhere, get on a bus, get on a train, and the whole 9 yards. Well, the person who has just put on their tennis shoes and then gets a phone call says, no, don't go this weekend, go next weekend, whatever. They didn't finish the process. And I think that completely finish the process. Basically, you're died and you're not coming back. So there are probably many realms and dimensions that we don't know about. Even though it might be a very detailed, incredible NDE, there's probably stuff even beyond that. And, when you see some of these documentaries, MT, the spirit molecule, or some of the ayahuasca stuff, people talk about almost a kaleidoscope of realm after dimension. And I think that's what we're dealing with here, is that it's a long road, and some people are just in the very beginning of it. I mean, for example, they'll have a car accident and they'll be lightly injured and they'll float above their body, see some weird stuff, and then boom, right back in their body, and that's it. No love, no tunnel, no angels, no relatives. Other people get into a tunnel, like they're right about the light, and they feel some love and acceptance happening, and then boom, they're back in their body. And there's other people who feel like they go to a timeless place where they're discussing things with Source and God, and it feels like they're doing this for months and months before they come back. It's completely timeless.
Right.
So not everyone completes the journey.
Interesting. I mean, there's been a lot of kind of research. I mean, there at the moment of death. I'm not sure if you saw 21 grams. There's a theory about, and the study it's called. I guess it was called 21 grams. The figure that at death, the soul could weigh 21 grams because the body is lighter by 21 grams at the moment of death. Mm-hmm. And so it's almost as if there's a piece of your body or a piece of your consciousness itself is exiting your body and thereby reducing the weight of your physical body. So I think that's interesting too. What do you think causes an NDE?
I'm just still thinking about your 21 grams. I thought it was going to be a drug joke or something. No, it's really cool. Before I answer the causes thing, the problem with science, and I'm really tough on them actually, being one of them. When they think that a question is not serious, they won't even examine it, and that's just such like the wrong attitude. So if you said to them, let's create a whole study and let's buy 20 special scales and let's go to an ICU and measure people, they probably would laugh and not even study it. And so when people say there's no evidence for this and that, you don't find evidence where you don't look. And I think that if that's true about this 21 grams, that's totally fascinating. And there was a lot of interest in that kind of study, psychical research in England and maybe the U.S., like late 18th and 19th centuries. I'm not a history buff, but in some ways I think there's been more of a open mind than now. Now, you just asked me, what do I think causes them?
Right.
Well, I think that we have kind of several anatomies. I think we've got a physical anatomy, and just my own opinion here, and I think we have kind of a spiritual anatomy.
Yeah.
And I think that they are sort of joined all the time. And I think that when you have a bad injury, or even you get scared to death, or have a deep meditation experiences, in several types of unusual experiences, the physical anatomy and the spiritual anatomy get out of sync with each other. And that's sort of the short answer of what I think is going on. Besides all the fact that when your body is really not doing well, on the verge of death, your consciousness seems to be able to travel much easier than when you're healthy.
It's interesting because regardless of your religion or your background or your culture, the one common thing that we share is that we're going to die. At least our physical bodies are going to die. So I wonder how much of this has become sort of a coping mechanism. I mean, it's very intriguing to read about these experiences, and I mean, not that I'm afraid of death. It's interesting, man. These stories about, this endless love, and I'm with my family, and that there's, if we can get into the game aspect, it seems as if, in a few of the experiences I noticed that, I mean, this lady talks about how she kind of wakes up and they're in front of these kind of like computers that connect them into something, and she's laying next to a bunch of other people who are also connected in, and it's almost as if, I think you mentioned this earlier, it's almost as if we're playing this game here on Earth and we've forgotten that we're playing entirely. So yeah.
Good points. Can I riff on that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad you brought that up, because basically what you're mentioning there is, what is all this about? What is this about in the really large scheme of things? And there's an NDE in our database. I don't recall exactly which one. It is in our forum if you search for the terms individuation of consciousness. And basically what the NDE person was saying was that all of humanity, and maybe even stuff in other worlds, is basically made of the same consciousness, the same love-based consciousness. And at some point, it may be billions of years ago, or in some timeless dimension, we decided to be separate a little bit and to have separate experiences and to sort of play a game. When you got a huge, boiling party, sometimes people put on masks and they scare each other and they go creep around in the woods, and then they come back to the banquet table and they start laughing again and say, "Boy, I scared you again," and maybe there's this big cosmic party where we were all together in this big ball of love, and maybe we were as this ball of love for billions of years, and maybe we said, "This is great and it's comfortable and it's warm, but let's do something new." And it may be that we decided to create a stage show or to evolve or something. But that one post in the forum called Individuation of Consciousness says that consciousness was basically like a big dough ball, and then it got cut up into all these little things that would become baguettes or whatever. And we chose to be individual for a period of time. And, this stuff goes back a ways. In the 60s, I don't know if you've heard of Alan Watts.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was popular with the hippies and stuff, and he's got a great lecture series that's like 10 hours of lectures. He goes into consciousness and some of the Eastern philosophy principles, and then you see it get even earlier. You see a lot of that stuff with like Ramana Maharshi in the 40s and 50s. We're all one. We're all part of Source. And then you see it pop up again. I don't know exactly when, year 2000 with Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now and A New Earth. The idea that we're all connected. So I forgot what the original question was, but
if we could just get back into kind of the science aspect of this, nature has this process. I mean, it doesn't really ever create anything that is junk, right? And science has explored like maybe 10% of our DNA. We're still figuring out what DNA does. Like we still have no idea like what our bodies and DNA and this DNA, and science has termed it junk DNA. So nature doesn't really produce junk ever. I'm not sure if you agree with that.
Or dark matter.
So yeah, man, it's interesting that we exist in these human lives, and perhaps to go back to my previous point, perhaps we've forgotten that this is a game, and we're living it, and we're so immersed in our 9-to-5 jobs and like everything that we're doing to survive that we've completely forgotten that we came here to kind of experience and learn and grow. And so yeah, I definitely vibe with everything that Alan Watts and these previous authors have been saying about how we are one and we're connected. All of that seems to ring true for me.
Well, it's it seems like we decided to give ourselves a good fright, and the NDEs, they talk about love as the basis for everything, and I think that we arrive here as with this illusion, thinking that we're separate individuals, when in fact we're all connected to each other, and then we get scared, and then we start, getting corrupted and stealing money from each other and buying up all the land while your neighbor can barely eat and stuff. But in the NDEs, they talk about it's all about love and loving actions. And this is a good segue because there's a YouTube channel. There's a lady, she talks about God's glasses, and it's a video clip, and it's awesome because she has an NDE. She was taking diet pills, which should only be taken for a few months. She was taking them like for 10 years. And she managed to get herself into complete respiratory arrest. And basically what happens is she has the NDE and she has a life review, and she sees the events of her life. And she's a real pretty girl, and she talks about being on the cheerleading squad and graduating high school and graduating college and, buying a car and all these sort of like things. And then some sort of light being says to her, "Okay, cool. Now there's some glasses on the table. I want you to put them on." And she puts on the glasses and says, "We're going to do your life review again." And so they kind of, rewind the tape or whatever. And she sees her life again, and none of that stuff is there. Not the cheerleading, not the graduating from high school, not the buying the car, nothing. The only thing that she sees are love-based events. She sees when she helped an old lady carry groceries across the street, when she just gave someone her ear who needed to talk, when she basically did any kind of loving action. And she was like, put the glasses down and said, wow. And the light being, or whoever that intelligence was, said, those were the only things that were important to me in your whole life, the loving events. So I think we are here to, I think it's like a haunted house ride, at the beach. I think we're here to give ourselves a scare a little bit and then to see through it and act loving. Like the Eastern masters talk about. You've got to start seeing through the illusion and understanding who you really are.
Yeah, it's a big question, man. I mean, why are we here? That's a huge, huge question. So, I mean, do you think do you think it would be possible to chemically induce an NDE experience?
That's a really interesting question. Where I live, that would not be possible. That's a good question. Would it be the same type of event, or would it be a similar event?
Right.
I know people who've smoked things and compared it to meditation and said, it was similar, but not the same. One guy said, I'm sure it's not exactly the same. And then you get into the morality question. I know that in that Terence McKenna, as you well know, talks a lot about DMT, and also Rick Strassman talks about DMT, the spirit molecule.
Right.
And in some of these experiences, people go into these other realms, and an entity or an intelligence or a relative will say to them, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. So that kind of, and the other side does not appear to be very judgmental. And I hope we hit that base tonight, because judgment is not really a big part of NDEs at all. But it makes me wonder if there's sort of a sanctioned pathway to other dimensions, or a sort of a wise way of doing it versus an unwise way of doing it. Mm-hmm. I just, I don't have enough wisdom to even answer that.
Yeah, that's really intriguing, just because if this is all occurring in the pineal gland and it's kind of manufactured through DMT in your brain naturally, then perhaps smoking DMT is similar to an NDE. And yeah, there is a huge morality aspect to it, just because, I mean, if you're taking to a person to a point of death and then bringing them back, I think there's been a movie made about that. The results are never something favorable. But yeah, man, I mean, all of this is highly intriguing. Is there another story that you have maybe for us that could perk up our listeners?
And I also I wanted to talk after the story. I'd like to talk about the judgment and maybe even ask you a question or two. But
sure.
Let me give you a short one here. This one is from Carol V. She's in the database, and she's become a friend of mine, very nice person. She had an NDE in January of 1963. And one of the reasons I love this one is because she was only 12 years old. And so what this kind of does is reduce the religious baggage of the experience. Mm-hmm. One of the things that skeptics will tell you is that, we have these religious visions because we've been indoctrinated. And, the Baptist person has a Baptist NDE, and the Hindu guy has a Hindu NDE. And that's really not the reality of what we're seeing in the data. And when you get someone young enough, they might not have had any religious indoctrination. And 12 is sort of on the borderline, but we've had NDEs of people 4 years old, 3 years old, 5 years old drowning. Kids who might know the word God, but they're not going to know, you need to be saved by baptism and, by the Romans and Ephesians. I mean, they're not going to know that stuff.
Wow,
and,
yeah.
So those kids do have profound NDEs that tell us things when you start comparing them. But Carol's, and that's, by the way, why the NDERF has in their questionnaire, did you have any knowledge of NDEs before you had your experience? Some people have read books by, Raymond Moody and others. Some have heard about it a little bit, and others have never heard of it. And they're like, what's an NDE? And why was I flying above my car after the car accident? So that helps the researchers to sort out the data a little bit. But in Carol's NDE, she said that she knew not that much about religion. So it's not very long. Let me just read this to you.
Okay.
It says, I froze to death at 12 years old. It was around 3 in the morning, January 6th, 1963. My family had just returned from our holiday vacation to a frigid house that had no heat or electricity or water due to an ice storm earlier that evening. The temperature inside the house was below freezing. We went to icy cold beds, thinking we would deal with the situation in the morning. We were all exhausted from the all-night drive. My body temperature plummeted and hypothermia set in. I was totally numb. Then my spirit essence left my body. I traveled up past my body, up through the ceiling of my room, and through the roof of our house. I kept going. I traveled through time and space and towards a void of light. As I traveled, I experienced a life review. My grandfather's soul greeted me on the other side, where I encountered many other souls, entities, light beings, angels, experiences and realms that were unlike anything within our human contexts. And this is a 12-year-old saying this. I recognized great masters such as Buddha, Krishna, and others, whom I have no names for but were perfect beings while on earth. I experienced light beings who were knowledge and gave me answers to all the questions of the universe, universal truth and knowledge. I experienced Christ, and finally I experienced total and complete and perfect light, love, joy, and God consciousness. I understood how we are all part of this amazing frequency that is God resonation. I was told it was not my time to stay, and that I was being sent back to my 12-year-old body. I was given information and a mission. I was then immediately sent back against my protests. Gravity hit me at one point, and that was the most painful part of the whole experience. Gravity. When I came to, I was dazed, and my sister, who slept next to me, was crying and visibly upset. She had been trying to wake me because she knew something was horribly wrong. I had stopped breathing and was lifeless. She thought I had died.
Wow.
So pretty intense.
Very intense.
And not all of them see Christ, by the way, Jesus Christ. I mean, there's some do, some don't, and there's...
So you're stripping away the religious aspect of this and our implied societal, moral aspects of this. Like, have you read any suicide type NDE reports where a person has attempted to commit suicide and failed and instead had an NDE?
I have, but unfortunately, my memory is not real good on those. We're real careful in the forums because we don't want people to think that, you're going to get off scot-free and you're not going to have any problems. The reality is that we just don't know. And as I recall, some of them, those people are not viewed as sinners. They're viewed as people who've got a soul sickness. And they need healing. And I think probably what's going to go on, as I recall a little bit, is I think that light beings are going to encounter them and bring them to places of healing. Because as I understand it, on the other side, there are, counseling centers, clinics, places where people heal you, places where you learn how to heal others. And they're going to be given the love and the attention they need. And it may involve also a lot of inconvenience. Some people in NDEs find themselves in a negative void, like completely black, no love, just a sense of, I'm alive, I'm thinking, I have a consciousness, but where is everybody? And, you could call it hell, you could call it purgatory, you could call it separation. And generally that's not, the stories indicate that that's not permanent. The people, are there, and then they call out and they say, God, angels, whatever, Jesus, whoever it is they want to call upon. And then usually it's like, boom, somebody immediately arrives and pulls them to the light or to a different dimension that's more positive. When people end up in that void state, it appears that it's kind of a self-exile due to shame or fear. Maybe that somebody is dying and they're worried that they did a lot of bad stuff in their life. So when they approach the light, they're going to think, well, I shouldn't be near the light, I'm going to get punished. Or maybe they went to a lot of church sermons where they thought they were going to get punished. So they kind of, don't want to go any closer. And that's when they might stay there for a while until they say, oh, well, let's give it a shot and ask for help, and then boom, it's there.
Very interesting. I mean, there's a few kind of statistics that go into how common, or uncommon rather, NDEs are. And I think there was a study, and there's no way to poll everyone on the planet for this, and it was something like 13 million out of 13 million adults, 1% of them had experienced NDEs. So this isn't a common thing. This is highly rare to experience this.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read about any more dark, challenging experiences where it's not love and light? And
Yeah, those definitely exist. And let me say at the offset that they are the minority. And exact numbers escape me, but I want to say maybe 4, 5, or 6%, something like that. So you're talking overwhelming odds. I think I'm going to get embarrassed. Somebody's going to say he had the wrong number, but it is definitely the majority are positive. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a couple of theories about what's going on with the negative ones. The one theory that the person feels ashamed. They're probably not going to get judged, but they're worried they will. That's one theory.
They feel ashamed of what?
They feel ashamed that they might get punished by God for their life. So they try not to approach God or source or
okay.
higher self or whatever you want to call that.
So they don't go towards the light kind of thing.
Exactly. They're afraid to go in, even though they're welcome to go in.
Wow.
That's why, you hear the people say, well, send good vibes, prayers, and meditations, that they go towards the light. But another theory, some of these are really horrific. I won't kid you. Some people feel like they've met demons on the other side. Some people feel like they've met some sort of negative energy that rips them to shreds. There is a guy, I think it's Reverend Howard Storm. He was a real mean, arrogant, I think he was a high school teacher, but I'm not sure. And he had a near-death experience, and he describes feeling like demons were just ripping him to shreds. And it just got worse and worse until he cried out to God, and then a light being came and helped him, and immediately he was protected and went through a process and obviously came back to Earth to tell us about it. One of the theories about some of those very negative ones is that there's a mix of your physical consciousness and your spiritual consciousness. And I'll give you an example like this. Have you ever, had like a horrible sunburn, or you cut your leg really bad or something, and you're waking up in the morning and your leg is hurting or your sunburn is hurting, and you realize at the same time your dreams are totally sucking. It's like the physical pain you're in is somehow messing with your dreams.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's a theory that people who are in, for example, organ failure might be having hellish NDEs because the pain is starting to really press into their consciousness a lot. And I think that Howard Storm, I think he was into organ failure or ruptured appendicitis or something like that. Pretty painful stuff. And it may be just purely spiritual. It may be that really there are negative entities out there, and some people are allowed to see that as sort of a wake-up call. I don't really know the answer.
Do you think it's prudent to assume that perhaps if you had a good life, or if you were good in your life and you were generally a good person, that perhaps you would have a better NDE than, say, Hitler?
Hitler's a tough one, but there was someone in our forums recently, and I'm going to trust he's accurate on this. He said that studies have not really found a good connection between nice people having nice NDEs and horrible people having horrible NDEs. I think whatever the stellar, machinery or gears of that process, whatever that's going on there, I think it's beyond us. However, the NDEs do not talk about judgment, much at all. As a matter of fact, usually they talk about having a life review, and then we judge ourselves. In other words, a light being or, the light or something might say to us, well, how do you think you did? And the person might say, man, I did a horrible job. And the light might say, it's okay, you were just learning. And I've read so many dozens or hundreds of times I was my own judge that I can't even count it. So if you in this life have a hard time, being nice to yourself, or saying, I was having a bad day, but we all do. If you can't say things like that, you're going to have trouble in your life review, because you've got to realize that everyone is, nobody's perfect, and we're all learning, and you cannot learn without mistakes, So you're going to get that flexibility, that love, and that compassion in your life review. It's not going to be like, oh, that horrible mortal sin, as far as I've read.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, man.
And as a matter of fact, let me pull you up a quote here regarding judging myself, because there's just so many, but I've got at least one here. It says, this is coming from a lady, I believe she's in Australia or maybe New Zealand. I don't remember, but it's Yasmin S., NDE number 6992. And can I read just a little bit of this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Everything was becoming clear to me. Oh, and the nurses were calling my name. One was crying, tears. Another was saying, "Oh my God, we've lost her." Meanwhile, I was above them thinking what silly billies they were, making all that fuss, wondering why they couldn't see me and just know that I was perfectly fabulous. I was flying through goldenness, pure, serene, delightful goldenness. Oh wow. I was held by this serenity for the longest time. I couldn't do anything except be with it, and it with me. It was inside me. It was me. It was in and with everyone and everything. I had always been in and with everything. It was and is truth and love and compassion and joy and all, capital A, all. This goldenness held all information. And by the way, that's similar to what Edgar Cayce talked about with the Akashic record. But continuing with Yasmin, it says, it was the one mind. It contained the creation of all of everything ever created. I felt, experienced everything that has ever been and ever shall be. All is simultaneously occurring. That goes back to Be Here Now with Ram Dass and Richard Alpert. All is simultaneously occurring. There is no past or future. It all just is. There is no way to describe the immaculate beauty of this experience, though every day for the last 35 years I wish I could find a way. Bliss is a mere descriptive word, yet does not give to you what I wish is the... it's not conveying completely the experience. I saw and experienced every single detail of my present life up to that moment, like watching a movie, yet starring as the main character simultaneously. That made me feel quite sad, as I had not lived my life in a state of serene joy and felt ashamed. Ashamed that I had not realized how imperative it is for one to be incredibly happy in this life, no matter what the circumstances, the pain, the fear, no matter what. All our material conflicts of body and mind are quite unimportant in the state of ultimate freedom and blissful awareness to which we shall all return. I felt I had been unfaithful to the Great Presence, who, like a divine loving mother, I had let down. I was my own judge, and yet I was this love simultaneously. I saw how all of humanity has walked with eyes cast low to the earth, not opening wide to the beauty of the one loving presence of golden peace, in which we truly live yet do not see. So that was from Yasmin.
So, Misha, we're approaching the end here, man. Is there anything that you want to get out or say, or anything for our listeners that you'd like to?
Don't rush to have an NDE. It'll cause big medical bills for you. This thing about are they really happening? Are they hallucinations? Science is having that debate right now. And there's an academic neurosurgeon recently had an NDE. Some of your listeners may have already heard about him. His name is Eben Alexander. I mean, he's a teaching professor, academic neurosurgeon. And he had a very unexpected, meningitis, bacterial meningitis. And it got so bad and so out of control, he went into coma for a few days or a week or something. I don't remember the time, but he came out of it, and he's written a book recently. And if you want a guy that understands the brain and all of its features, all of its structures, how much blood pressure should keep you alive, how much cortex should be healthy to give you thinking, this is the guy. And I think he even met a dead, very young sister that he never met or something on the other side. Some veridical detail like that. I can't recall. But this guy is now going around giving lectures, and he's quite convinced that consciousness is not the brain. He's quite convinced that the brain is a tool to feed human experiences into your real consciousness. And so that's quite fascinating. And you asked about wrapping up. I'll just give you two quick little thoughts. Your listeners can watch an awesome video on YouTube. They need to look for Anita Morjani at TEDx. That's Anita, and her last name is Moorjani. Anita Morjani at TEDx. She had a very profound NDE. And in our forum, we just recently had a new member, and he had a profound NDE, and I'll just read you a real short quote from him. This is Scott W., NDE number 7578. I felt this feeling I can only call love, that knows no boundary of time, space, or consciousness. It covers everything that has been, is, and will be. I've read it, I've heard it, I've intellectualized it and believed, but never have I felt in my soul until then. Not because we can bribe love by our acts or control it with penance or faith. It's just because we are, and it loves us all no matter what.
Wow. These are really powerful, man. And yeah, it does seem like death is just a transition, and, you know, maybe we're just switching suits. And yeah, I am fascinated by this topic, and this hour flew by, man.
Xavier, I forgot to give credit. I'm one of the administrators on our forum, which is ndurf.me. The main site is ndurf.org, but there's also on the forum Gary from Canada, who helps, with the programming and reading posts and stuff. So a big shout out to Gary, who does a good job, and to all of our forum members too. And I apologize that I interrupted you.
Very cool. So people can find